In 1967, 3 Harvard scientists published a landmark study in the New England Journal of Medicine that shaped American dietary guidelines for 50 years. They were paid $6,500 by the sugar industry to write it. They never disclosed it, and millions of Americans ate the wrong diet for decades because of it. You're listening to The Unlit Room. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Today, how the sugar industry bought the science that blamed fat. 1965, Cambridge, Massachusetts. D. Mark Heggie Stead sits in his office at the Harvard School of Public Health. He's a respected nutritionist, chair of the department. Frederick Stair is with him, head of Harvard's entire nutrition program. They've just received an assignment from the Sugar Research Foundation. The assignment is simple: review the existing scientific literature on sugar and heart disease and make the problem go away. By the early 1960s, heart disease had become America's leading killer. Scientists were debating the cause. Some pointed to dietary fat, especially saturated fat from meat and dairy. Others pointed to sugar. The evidence linking sugar to heart disease was growing. Studies showed that high sugar intake raised triglycerides, contributed to obesity, and increased cardiovascular risk. The sugar industry needed that conversation to stop. That's where John Hickson came in. Hickson was an executive at the Sugar Research Foundation, the industry's trade group. In 1964, he proposed a strategy: fund research that would exonerate sugar and shift the blame to fat. Not by proving sugar was safe, by shaping the narrative so that question never got a fair trial. The target was a literature review, not new research, a summary of existing studies. The kind of paper that gets cited in textbooks, in government policy, in medical training. The kind of paper that shapes what an entire generation of doctors believes to be true. Hickson approached Heggie Stead and Stair. The payment was $6,500, about $50,000 in today's money. In a letter to the Sugar Research Foundation, Heggie Stead wrote, "We are well aware of your particular interest and will cover this as well as we can." Harvard in the 1960s was the pinnacle of American academic medicine. A paper from Harvard carried weight. A paper in the New England Journal of Medicine, the most prestigious medical journal in the world, carried even more. The sugar industry understood that. They weren't buying scientists, they were buying credibility. Heggie Stead and Stair got to work. Their assignment wasn't to falsify data. It was subtler than that. They reviewed the same studies everyone else had access to. But the industry got to decide which studies mattered. In correspondence, Sugar Research Foundation executives reviewed drafts, made suggestions, pointed the authors toward favorable interpretations. Studies that linked sugar to heart disease were dismissed as flawed. Studies that blamed saturated fat were amplified. The paper was published in 1967 in the New England Journal of Medicine. It was titled Dietary Fats, Carbohydrates and Atherosclerotic Disease. The conclusion: saturated fat and cholesterol were the dietary villains. Sugar, barely mentioned. The journal didn't require conflict of interest disclosures in 1967. That policy wouldn't exist for another 17 years. So the paper carried no footnote, no disclaimer, no mention of who had paid for it. It looked like independent science, and it became foundational. Cited in government policy, taught in medical schools, repeated in public health campaigns. For decades, the debate about sugar and heart disease was considered settled, not because the science was definitive, but because the sugar industry had bought the paper that closed the debate. Science is supposed to be self-correcting. Bad studies get challenged, errors get caught. But that only works if the corruption is visible. When the funding is hidden, when the authors don't disclose who's paying them, the correction never happens. The paper just sits there, laundering corporate influence into institutional trust. But here's the part that turns this from a one-time deception into something systemic. D. Mark Heggie Stead, one of the 3 Harvard scientists paid by the sugar industry, didn't retire in obscurity. In 1977, he became the head of nutrition at the United States Department of Agriculture. And in that role, he helped draft the dietary goals for the United States. the blueprint for America's official dietary guidelines. The guidelines emphasized reducing fat. They said almost nothing about sugar. America listened. The food industry responded by removing fat from thousands of products and replacing it with sugar. Low-fat yogurt, low-fat cookies, low-fat everything. The labels said healthy. The ingredient list said corn syrup. And then the obesity epidemic began. It took nearly 50 years for the scheme to surface. In 2016, a researcher named Kristin Kearns was digging through archival documents at the University of Illinois and Harvard. She was looking for industry influence in nutrition science. What she found were thousands of pages of correspondence between Sugar Research Foundation executives and the Harvard scientists. Letters laying out the strategy, drafts reviewed by industry, payments documented. Kearns and her co-author, Stanton Glantz, a professor of medicine at UCSF, published their findings in JAMA Internal Medicine in September 2016. Glantz said, the sugar industry was able to derail the discussion about sugar for decades. By then, H.E.G. Stead and Stair were both dead. John Hickson, the Sugar Research Foundation executive who conceived the plan, was dead. The New England Journal of Medicine had long since adopted conflict of interest rules. But the damage was done. An entire generation had followed corrupted science, and the consequences, obesity, diabetes, metabolic disease, were still compounding. This is the architecture of manufactured consensus. $6,500. 3 scientists. 1 paper. 50 years of dietary policy built on a foundation that was never disclosed. The question isn't just what happened in 1967. It's what's happening now. What other settled science is shaped by undisclosed funding? What other industries have figured out that you don't need to silence the research? You just need to fund the right paper at the right time and let institutional trust do the rest. The sugar industry didn't break into the journals. They didn't forge data. They didn't need to. They understood how the system worked, and they used it. If this one kept you up tonight, good. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Subscribe so the next one finds you too. Follow the Unlit Room wherever you listen. Tell a friend who can't sleep. Full story on the main channel. Follow if you're wide awake. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark.